Hi, my name is Stefanie Wuschitz, and I would like to talk about Indonesia's vibrant art scene. I was in Indonesia the first time around 8 years ago, and I would like to introduce you to the research I did in these years. First of all, this is a postdoc project, an artistic research project, and will end up in an animation movie based on interviews that we took in Indonesia. Indonesia is here, Southeast Asia, and the story I talk about is mostly happening in and around Salatiga on central Java. Other islands in Indonesia have different cultures, different languages. For example, in Sumatra, there's a strong matriarchy, the Minangkabau, that share tools similar to a makerspace or hackerspace, just that they're really male dominated, and the Indonesian Minangkabau cultures are female dominated. But in the end, this domination just entails that women in this community, or people socialized as women, take care and maintain all the belongings of the community. So it's really a care work and administration work to keep the commons in the same way as they are, so that everyone can profit from them. In Java, there's not a matriarchy in that sense. It's a very old culture based in different roots and languages than the Sumatra Minangkabau culture. But also in Java, I felt that the art scene and the hacker and maker scene is really based on commons, and all the culture workers can only work in very precarious situations because they help each other out through commons. And this project is an extension of my Nene project, in which I interviewed, together with Cindy Lin, mothers and grandmothers of artists and hackers in Live Patch, Indonesia. So, as mentioned, I think that the art and maker culture has really old roots, and it's not something imported from the West. It's very much related to Gavis. And Gavis is the organization I would like to talk about today. It's a huge feminist group that emerged after the independence war in Indonesia, and was very much about DIY and peer-to-peer learning and emancipation and autonomy. Gavis is a shortcut for Indonesian women's movement, and it was the largest women's movement in the world at that time, if you don't count in political parties, because it was not a political party. My collaborator, Nilu Ignatia, took interviews with survivors of women who were part of this movement and talked about their lives to us. Because of COVID-19, I could not go to Indonesia to take these interviews myself, but together we prepared and transcribed these interviews, and they will be part of the animation movie I'm doing now. Feminism is also not imported from the West in Indonesia. There were always very strong feminist groups in Indonesia fighting in the independence war, but also organizing before the independence war. For example, here, these first women congresses. And although all these women groups in Indonesia were from different political and religious spectrums, they always met for these women congresses and formulated shared demands. And that's why women very early on in Indonesia, earlier than in Austria or Germany, took on ministry positions. For example, two women leaders of Gerwani were also the first ministers under Sukarno's first presidency. Sukarno was the first president of Indonesia, and he was in power from 1945 until 1967. He was thought of being close to the Soviet Union in the Cold War, but actually he tried to make a new third way for Indonesia that was kind of a guided democracy, as he called it. And he was on the side of this women's movement. He supported their self-organization and their tight network of grassroots groups, and also their very, very large culture activities when it came to performance, dance, theater, or making things together. The founding of that group, Gavis, happened in Samarang 1950, and it grew within 10 years into millions of members, mostly because the young students who were now permitted to study, female students who were permitted to study at the university, were joining forces with farmers, women who were both groups were very much against polygamy. So Gavis was fighting for the right to have your own land, to have a marriage reform, to have no child marriages. And this was also something that can be a clear division point between Communist Party or Socialist parties and Gerwani's organizations, because they never followed actually any of these parties due to the fact that their male leaders, had all polygamous marriages. This way they had a lot of enemies, of course. They had enemies in the Communist Party and the Socialist Party, but most of all they had enemies in the US, Australia, England, and Europe, because they were very much against money from foreign countries invested into Indonesia. What they wanted was that factories and oil plants and rice exports and copper and gold industry is in the hands of Indonesian people. And that was something that the Dutch, as well as Australia and the US or China, were not accepting. So John McCarthy was the first to intervene secretly into that state and try to make lists of all these feminist movements members and who are the leaders and who is in charge of organizing. All the things that Gerwani stood for was very independent and not influenced so much by Western philosophy or Soviet Union philosophy. There were certain role models that maybe Gerwani members knew about and looked up to, but all their policies and their ways of thinking were developed in very small groups where they met and read texts together and discussed and came up with manifestos together. Another channel of communication was Appicardini, a very strong magazine that looks a little bit like DIY feminist magazines today. It's about menstruation, Circle, for example, how to protect yourself from pregnancy, how to build things you need in everyday life. And also the communication channel was art. So a lot of groups at the university, but also in the villages that were actually Gerwani groups, worked together as artists, danced together or improvised theater to communicate political ideas. It was a really big community of small sub-communities, and these sub-communities again were divided into small collectives that did culture work together. Unfortunately, this became too powerful and too strong and too effective for the most powerful man in the world. And President Johnson gave weapons to different separatist groups and also trained generals from a very right-wing part of the Indonesian military in the US in order to become better in logistics. And this kind of knowledge about logistics was later used in horrible massacres that were organized by this Indonesian part of the military. Richard Nixon is today known that he subverted many young democracies, also Chile, for example. And he did that too in Indonesia. Indonesia was given a new president, and this president was chosen by Richard Nixon and Milton Friedman in a way that he would follow the logics of neoliberalism. So they wanted to have Indonesian in the Cold War on the Western side, on the US side. So they put into power Suharto through a coup d'etat. And Suharto, from the beginning, spread a lot of propaganda. He took down all communication channels except for his radio channel. And there he repeatedly spread the fake news that Gerwani members would have killed the generals of the military and in a perverted way would have tortured them and cut off their penises in order to get into power, which was very ridiculous because first of all, there's evidence that this didn't happen. And secondly, they themselves were against the coup d'etat that had happened before to get Sukarno out of power. So they had really no interest to lose their president. But nevertheless, until today, most people in Indonesia think that Gerwani was the group that started the coup d'etat against the first president. And the second president, Suharto, who was set secretly into power by the US, brought most of the women into prison. But there were also huge massacres on the central figures of the organization and any leftist person for that matter. Now in our research, we try to find coded memories and hidden traces of this activism and this art that this women organization brought about. It's hidden in many forms of still existing art in Java, and it's for me also the key to understand why there's such a big and diverse and vibrant and wonderful art scene around Yogyakarta, for example. Because this military horrible New Order regime could kill people, but these tactics and strategies and this philosophy that these women organizations had set in, this network of collaboration and self-reliance is still existing. And although so many women were killed and were tortured and were forced to stay in prison, their theory about how to organize and how to build commons and maintain commons is still existent and still working. So we took interviews with different ladies and they told us about their lives, which was very hard for them because it's a lot of family secrets. Sometimes their own children don't know what happened to them. Sometimes their husbands don't know. Sometimes they still work on the street selling spring rolls to survive. So it's very difficult to dig into these old wounds, but I think if they know that they were not alone, but it was millions of people, it can be a healing process as well. So we are interviewing current contemporary artists and activists and asking them about their strategies and if they see similarities to Gerwani. And until now, we had very positive results. And I hope that in spring 2021, that animation movie documentary will be done. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope I see you in person soon. Bye.